Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm from Bunnyfoot, Universality. We're a company that provides consultancy and research services to commercial organisations, government agents, and educational establishments. What I want to talk about today is accessibility and web accessibility. I'm going to introduce it first by actually asking the question, what is usability and accessibility in the first place? We're going to focus more today on accessibility, but usability, the ability to actually use a site and get something useful out of it, is an essential component. In order to illustrate this, I just want to ask, what makes a good library in the first place? It's something we've all got experience of, so we'll throw away the technology aspects of it and just ask, what makes a good library? Well, to begin with, for a library, you need some sort of building, some sort of repository that it all lives in. Now, this could be a fantastic building like we have here in Zagreb, or it could be a kind of porter cabin or a tent or anything. It doesn't really matter. But with that building comes certain restrictions. Of course, in order to make a good library as well, we need some books. And these books, if it's a good library, have to be shelved on the appropriate height so people can reach them. But they also have to be referenced and cross-referenced very well so people can find the appropriate book. So there's an organisational element there. You also need a happy librarian. So if you're going into your library, unless there's a happy librarian there to help you get your books, to welcome you when you first come in, and to greet you when you're a returning user, if it's a bad-tempered librarian, you're not going to go back and you're not going to use it. And lastly, you need a ramp. So we can see where we had lunch today, there's a nice big ramp out of there. It's a necessity, and often in many countries a legal necessity, to provide access for people with disabilities. The ramp here represents an easy way how people in wheelchairs could possibly get into the library. But also, essentially, it also presents other opportunities, so people pushing prams, mothers pushing prams, or the delivery men can also get access. So although the primary purpose of the ramp would be to facilitate people in wheelchairs, it also has other benefits for people without disabilities. Okay, so you can probably see where I'm going here. What makes a good website? Well, you do need some sort of repository for where your information is going to go. In many cases, it will be a nice big screen, but also there's various other mediums how we can get access to this information. And I'll show you some examples of those later. You need your books in the right place. So this is loosely information architecture. You need to speak the user's language. You need to reference and organise all your information in the appropriate way so people can find it easily. And you need a happy librarian, which almost represents your user interface. So it's something that assists you when you're first using a site, shows you where to go, but also something for the experienced users of the site will help them use the site efficiently. Efficiently. So this really encompasses the user interface aspects. And you need a ramp, which is technical accessibility. So this is making sure your coding is to the appropriate standards, and that people with a whole range of different needs, not necessarily just the disabled, can actually get access to your content. Because in the end, it's very important that they are going to get access. And this really encompasses universality, the ability to have your information and it being flexible and malleable enough in order to reach out to your intended audience without your expressed knowledge necessarily of what their individual needs are. If you take any of these aspects away, so if you had bad shelving, even if you had a very good interface and a nice ramp going in there, your technical standards, if your information was all over the place, people couldn't use it. If you put that back and you have a very good ramp and a very good shelving, but an angry librarian, people again aren't going to engage with your website. And also, if you don't have the ramp there, you're excluding a number of people, those with disabilities and also potentially other ones that you want to reach. So just to summarise, technical accessibility is not enough. Just going to coding is not enough. You need good usability, and both are required for a successful site. So just looking at accessibility now, why it's important. There's lots and lots of reasons, but they can roughly be classified into these three different ones. There's a rational kind of business sense, a moral reason, and also some sort of obligations. In many countries, a legal obligation. So the rational reasons are, of course, if you're providing an accessible site which can reach out to everyone, then your actual target audience will be a lot larger because more people can see it. There's also other associated benefits such as higher visibility in search engines and those types of things. So basically your reach, your market reach is getting much, much higher. And whether it's for students or for commercial reasons, obviously that's very important. Potentially there's lower support costs. If people can actually engage with your site and get the information that you're wanting to present them with, then they won't have to go via other routes. You can have an efficiency in providing one central source of information and charting that over lots of different channels. And basically they're easy and cheaper to maintain. You can make one change which will affect a whole site, and there's a potential there for enhanced reputation. So by using the internet and really exploiting the flexibility that it has, you can be seen to be, the leader in this new field. It's important to realise that you don't necessarily know who your customers are and what they're going to be using or what your users are using. Not everyone uses a large computer with a big screen. Some people use various different mobile devices, and these are increasing all the time. Potentially people use the internet in a car. The internet in a car is a very important thing to think about, because effectively when you're driving, you're effectively blind. You have to listen to output and you have to talk to an interface in order to put output there. This was the thing that our company developed to demonstrate this. It uses the same type of technology that blind people use to engage with the internet, but we've just shown it in a different application, which will potentially be a way that people engage in the future. It's also important to realise that there's different devices, but also lots of different software. So this is just a list I got off the internet, which shows all the different types of browsers that we have, and obviously, browser incompatibility is a really big issue for people who are developing websites and any online information. Most people do use Internet Explorer and Netscape, but not everyone, and this just shows you how many there are. And even if everyone did use Netscape and Internet Explorer, there's 30 versions of each, and they all have different compatibilities with different technologies. So in essence, of accessibility is allowing your information to be visible on all of these different media and all of these different softwares. So that's the kind of pragmatic reasons. There's ethical reasons. This year, as Victor mentioned earlier, is the European Year of People with Disabilities. This is kind of a European campaign. It's highlighting that people with disabilities have just different needs. They actually, it's the way they access information, the way they live in the world is the same. It's just they have different informational needs and different way about getting that. So that's their website there. This is increasing the issue of accessibility and universality. So there's no reason from an ethical perspective why you should restrict the information on your website to just people who can see it, for instance, or people who are blind who may want to engage. And one theme of that is remembering that people who we would term disabled aren't necessarily disabled when they interface with the internet. It's actually the way that we put our information there that might disable them. But because the internet is so flexible, it's an information medium, we should be able to fulfill their needs. So I'd like to watch the following video clip. It's a blind user, so he can't see the screen. What you will hear is a screen reader talking out the content. This guy is filling out an online tax form, something we don't necessarily all want to do. And he's listening to the content of the forms, he's typing in with one of his hands, and he's feeling with his left hand a braille output device that is displaying what characters he's entering into the system. And you'll see what happens. So he's doing all that, and then his phone goes off. The sound you can hear talking is the screen reader interpreting the content of the website. You see, he's listening to his friend there. He's now feeling the output with his left hand. And he successfully completes the form while he's doing all those different things simultaneously. So the essence of that is really drives home that disabled, or what we view as disabled, is not necessarily less able, it's just they do things differently. So I certainly can't do that many things simultaneously. It confused the hell out of me, but he managed it quite well. Another illustration of that, I hope you can hear this. No, the audio is not high enough there. So the audio is not really good enough there. The gentleman here is interacting with a site which has a lot of text content, and the way that we would visually do it might be to scan certain elements and find certain informational things that we're interested in. He does it the same, but he's set his speech browser to speak at 300 words per minute, which, if you could have heard it, probably didn't matter because you wouldn't understand it anyway. It's so fast. So they just do things differently. The third reason is legal aspects. So in Europe, we have various European initiatives which are aiming to promote and ensure that people provide accessible information, non-discriminatory information. Individual countries have their own legal requirements. In the UK, there's the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995. And these are being updated all the time. Many of the disability laws were actually pre-web, so they don't actually directly address the accessibility issue because it wasn't in existence when these laws were first made. One country that has done that is the US, who have their Section 508 part of their disability legislation. And this specifically sets down guidelines for the technical aspects that need to be met in order to provide accessible information. In the UK and in Europe, there hasn't actually been any ratification of any legislation. The only real test cases, some have happened in the US, and the major one happened in Australia, where a blind sports fan was denied access to the Olympic site, the 2000 Sydney Olympics. He contacted them in advance. The Olympic Commission and their partners, IBM, refused to make their site accessible, and eventually it went to court and he won damages of $20,000, but also they were forced to make their site accessible at quite extreme cost. And of course their reputation was damaged because of that. There are probably more legal cases about to happen in Europe, and particularly in the UK at the moment. There's a formal investigation into web accessibility. Okay, so I've said about the reasons why we might want to get a usable and accessible site. I want to just quickly run through how you might go about doing that. And it's important when you're thinking about accessibility is, as I've underlined before, it's not just about people who are disabled. Real accessibility is providing input for anyone, anywhere, and potentially any equipment. Accessibility does have a technical aspect, so all of these are technologies that you might want to implement in order to get an accessible site. And there's various different ways of going about that. So there's certain things. This is just a very small section of the head of an HTML page, but there's lots of accessibility, technical accessibility information that's provided just within that small bit of text. And it's important to do things properly according to standards. But standards are only one thing. It's important to realise that you can't just code to standard, blindly code a standard compliant site. You also need some sort of meaning, interpretation of things. A good example of this is just providing a picture on your site. What you need to do when you provide a picture in order to provide the appropriate information for people who are blind and, say, listening to that is provide a thing called alt text. And alt text is basically a description of the image that appears there. But any single image could have several different interpretations, and it really depends on the context that image is in. So, for instance, for a globe, it could be just a pictorial element, depending on its context within the page. So it could say a photo of Earth from space. Could just be there to add prettiness to a page, so no actual information and meaning. In that case, you wouldn't want to actually put any description there, because it's just visual stimulation. It could be an informational item, a data a way of presenting data, for instance, dense clouds over most of South America. Or it could be a link, so you could click on the picture in order to go for information out of space. So just one single, very simple picture can have very different meaning, and it really depends on the context that you're in. And automated programs that check accessibility obviously can't have access to what the intention of that picture is. You also require an understanding of broader issues. So I've got two pictures of apples here. The one on the right is how that picture would appear to someone who has a certain type of colour blindness. This is important on the web because if you have things like, if you're presenting information that's not accessible to people with colour blindness, for instance, a very important link could be coded by saying, click on the red link, but they wouldn't see it. And also, it's important to realise that accessibility is not just this technical thing, it really requires very, very good usability. You have to make it easy, you have to make it enjoyable. Bad usability, we've all been to sites that are very, very poor, very badly designed, and you can't actually find what you're looking for. And this impacts people with special needs even more. Am I okay for time? Okay, so how do we go about this? How do we achieve accessibility? It's a big subject, so I'm just going to give you some kind of key nuggets here. There's general kind of themes. The basics. The first aspect is to realise that the web is an informational medium. So what you want to do is provide your information in a way that can reach everyone. Another general theme is graceful transformation. So the design of your site might be specifically geared to people who can see it. But what you want to do is provide it so that people who can't see it, when it breaks down, it'll actually break down in a graceful way, so that things won't appear all disjointed and all over the place. They'll actually appear in a logical, linear format, so people who are accessing via different means, such as screen readers, would be able to interpret and use the site. Another general theme is separating the actual content from the presentation. So you can structure your information in a certain way that you can then apply filters or style sheets or whatever you want to it in order to present it in a certain visual way or an auditory way or any different way. So a general theme is actually having the structure and the information in a certain way that you can then apply a presentation filter effectively over it. And it's vital to provide understandable and navigable content, so information presented in a very basic, simple way so people can move around effectively. Lots of people tend to think that providing a text-only site is accessibility. So they achieve some of these things by providing just text-only. That really should be your last option. Text-only is not accessible. It might be accessible to people who are blind, but you've got to appreciate that people with dyslexia, for instance, have the same flexible needs. They want to be able to potentially change the text size, change the background and the foreground colour. But they also rely on the images to a certain extent. So just providing a text-only site that's accessible is not meeting their needs. Again, it's one of the general themes is not trying to predict necessarily who all of your customers are or who your audience is. It's actually providing a flexible service that you can meet all of their needs. So have some appreciation of those issues, and also follow the technical standards. So the most widely followed ones are those provided by the World Wide Web Consortium, and specifically the Web Accessibility Initiative. Their guidelines were first published in 1999, and they're about to publish some new standards as well. But because it's a committee-based system, it's taken a long time to get them ratified. The original ones, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 1, they're broken down into 13 rough guidelines, and within those there's 65 checkpoints that have to be met in order to achieve accessibility. They are quite good, but there are some drawbacks. They are very technical, and they're very long, and they're very lengthy, and this presents an accessibility barrier almost for the people who are trying to use them. Some of the guidelines can be very vague. One of the important guidelines is use simple language, or use the most simple language that's appropriate to your audience. So everyone just ticks that and says, yes, I've done that. It's very hard to actually check that you've done that. And some of them can be overly prescriptive. Some of them are now outdated, so that you don't actually need to meet the checkpoints in order to make your site accessible. But in order to get your kind of badge of conformance, you have to actually meet that thing that is potentially actually non-accessible now. So they need to be updated. They are sectioned into 3 different priority levels, and you can get different badges of conformance there. Essentially, priority 1 is the one that most legal levels require you to meet from a technical perspective. And if you're going to do a kind of home-built accessibility service, these are probably 5 of the most important things that you need to do. The first one there is the one that most sites miss, and it's potentially also the easiest one to fix. It's providing alternative text for any imagery that you have there. Well, as I illustrated with the globe, it's very important to not just label something literally. It's important to convey the meaning in an equivalent way. And the other things are just general kind of usability and accessible issues. The third one, for instance, there is, click here is just no good as a link name. It could actually mean anything. So your links need to be have meaning when they're taken out of context. It's particularly important for people with special needs who are navigating using alternative methods. A way that people using screen readers navigate and look through a page is to press a certain key combination and just have all the links listed for them. And that way they can get a quick impression of what the page actually conveys and what the meaning is. But obviously if they're all called click here or more information, that gives them no information whatsoever. Another important theme, the 5th one, is ensuring that sites aren't just made so that they can be used with a mouse. Lots of people don't use mice. People with disabilities don't use mice, but also people who have their keyboard broken, or their mouse broken, such as on this laptop, won't use a mouse. So you need to make sure that they work with keyboards as well. So how to really ensure it is audit your site against the guidelines, and I'm obviously going to advise that you get a specialist such as my company in to help you. But one important theme is, even if you've got all the checkpoints ticked, you should test it with people, with real people, with your appropriate audience. So it's people with and without special needs. You should test it. I was going to run some examples here, but I think we've probably run out of time. Okay. So this is a clip from a recent user testing session. So this girl is essentially blind. She can just see rough differences between light and dark. I don't think we can hear that very well. Basically, she encounters several problems with the BBC site. This is an example of someone who you might not necessarily associate a special need with this gentleman. He's the head of several companies, associate director on lots of companies, but he's dyslexic. Dyslexia is a big issue, and part of providing for people with dyslexia who have no overt disability necessarily is providing very simple information in a way that's accessible to them, supported by appropriate imagery. We're also looking at the blue dot that's whizzing around there is an eye tracking system. Dyslexics often what's the word I'm looking for? Interact with the site and with written information in very different ways that we would, and the eye tracking is one way that shows the kind of areas of interest that he's zoning in on. Fortunately, we can't hear his comments. Basically, he's saying, "I can't find anything. You're using the wrong information. You're scaring me by saying all these kind of things up front." And essentially, he's getting very annoyed at the site. He's seeing it as an actual informational barrier. And obviously, for the Kahoot is a bank that's provided an online bank in England. Obviously, for them, what they want to do is engage with people and get them to sign up for their credit card. And essentially, this is annoying him by providing bad information. So And, you know, this is a rich, powerful guy. He would be their target client. Anyway, that's the end. No, not at all. There's been more firm guidelines on accessibility within the public sector, particularly in the UK I'm talking about, driven by the offices of the envoy. They obviously have to be seen to be doing things correctly, and they've got procedures and guidelines in place to try to ensure that. From a commercial perspective, it's vitally important that they are accessible. It's a legal requirement. But there are other associated benefits with being accessible, reaching a larger market reach, and all the different things that I mentioned. The prime stimulus, though, for commercial organisations is the law. Most of the organisations that we interact with at first don't know anything about accessibility, but they've been told by their legal department that they have to get this thing sorted, otherwise there's potential for them to come into conflict with some legal issues. So the legal aspect tends to be the stick that makes them try to get accessible, but there are quite a few carrots that are good things about being accessible as well. And once you educate them about those positives, the commercial organisations really buy into accessibility because it's basically a good thing. Yeah, this is one of the problems. There's people who are paying lip service to guidelines, so they're meeting all of the technical aspects. So they've got the ramp, in my library analogy, but they have a very angry librarian there. So it's a real difficult thing about the whole accessibility issue, and particularly with legal compliance, it's very hard to have a standard that actually encompasses usability and actual real use, and the only way to do that is by testing people. So yeah. Yeah, and some of the icons that I showed in that picture, and there's many more organisations are now bringing out their own icons as kind of badges of respectability. We've actually tested some of the most recent ones in the UK, and if you do an audit of the technical aspects, they do meet all of those technical stages, but at the same time they're presenting, the globe with the wrong alt text. So actually, in practice, it's unusable by people with special needs, and we've done a study that provides evidence of this. There's a very famous supermarket in the UK that has an online site and has a special accessible website. So they've received lots of attention for this. It's a very technically competent site, but it looks awful. It's totally unusable. It doesn't present the offer of the week like the main site does, and all those other kind of things. So actually, that is discriminatory and inaccessible, even though they've tried to do the right thing. So it's very difficult how you can gauge these things.
has to be done, I think. Okay, thanks very much, John, again.